Hello, my name is Olorotimi Osha. Today is June the 28th, 2026. We're just about less than a week to the 250th uh, anniversary of America's independence. And today I'd like to discuss um, wealth. Wealth. This is something that, of course, is very significant to Americans because everybody's been enthralled about, our new trillionaire, our first trillionaire, Elon Musk, right? Interestingly, Elon Musk is an immigrant, right? He wasn't born in America, and he's the richest man in the world, richest man in America, of course, first trillionaire. And on the eve of our independence in 1775, the richest man in America was also an immigrant, right? He wasn't born in America. He was an immigrant born in Liverpool, and he immigrated to America in at the age of 13, when he was 13 years old. He first moved to Maryland, and then eventually he moved to Philadelphia, and that's Robert Morris. Robert Morris was the richest man in America. He became a self-made man. He did get some, you know, he inherited some money from his dad, but at 13, as I said, he came to America at the age of 13. And then 16, he was able to get a job in banking and shipping. Eventually, uh, he became a partner in the Willing Morris and Company, right, which was a shipping company. So that's how he made his money. So he was the richest man in America in 1775. However, by 1776, somebody else took over, and that was a man from Maryland, right? A man from Maryland was now the richest man in America. Um, that's Charles Carroll. Charles Carroll is also notable for being the only Catholic to sign the Declaration of Independence. By the way, Robert Morris is one of only two men to have signed. He signed the Articles, the Declaration of Independence, right? And then he signed the Articles of Confederation. I've done a video talking about the Articles of Confederation. And he also signed the U.S. Constitution, right? The 1787 U.S. Constitution. So, uh, in any event, I will get back to talking about Charles Carroll. But Robert Morris lived an interesting life. He, as I said, became the richest man in America, and he's often called the financier of the war. But he's called the financier of the war, of the Revolutionary War. He became the first United States Superintendent of Finance. That was the predecessor of the Secretary of the Treasury. In fact, Robert Morris was the first pick of George Washington to become Secretary of the Treasury, but he turned it down and recommended Alexander Hamilton instead. So, of course, Alexander Hamilton, the young Alexander Hamilton, went on to become our first Treasury Secretary. Now, Robert Morris had a very significant impact on uh, the uh, the economy of the United States. Of course, he was the richest man uh, the year before the war, and I'll explain why his status as the richest man in America changed relative to uh, Charles Carroll of Maryland. So Robert Morris's wealth was in shipping, right? In shipping and trade, right? So he did a lot of trading between the British West Indies and Great Britain, right? So he did a lot of shipping. That was how he got his wealth. Uh, but once uh, the war between the United States and Great Britain broke out in 1776, uh, the Brits blockaded uh, American ships, right? It blockaded American shipping, and so importing and exporting, which was the mainstay of Robert Morris's fortune, his business, was disrupted. So basically, his fortune was pretty much decimated because of the disruption due to the Revolutionary War. But nevertheless, Robert Morris would go on to use his personal fortune to finance the Continental Army. So he would supply them, and he would also use his fortune to keep the army fed. Um, of course, he also had significant roles apart from being the United States Superintendent of Finance, which was the equivalent of the the Treasury of the Secretary, right? He also served as United States Agent of Marine, right? Agent of the Marine, which was the equivalent of being Secretary of the Navy. So he was responsible for supplying the army, right, for supplies and logistics, and again raising funds and equipping the army. Unfortunately for Robert Morris, though, after the war, um, he would lose his entire fortune after the war due to land speculation and the panic that happened in, was it in the 1790s, 1797, 1798, or thereabouts. There was a panic, was it between maybe 1796? I can't quite remember. But in the 1790s, there was a financial panic due to excessive land speculation. So he um, speculated excessively in land and lost a fortune, lost people's money, and he wounded up in debtor's prison. So how unfortunate that the person who actually financed America's Revolutionary War would end up in debtor's prison. So and after he got out, he was there for about 2 years. After he got out, he lived a quiet life. He lived in obscurity, and he never regained his fortune. And he died shortly after. But prior to that, he was pretty much he was active. He was very active politically. He became a senator representing Pennsylvania, right? A United States senator from Pennsylvania. He was one of the delegates uh, for the signing, who signed the U.S. Constitution, who drafted the U.S. Constitution. He was very active, and of course, his involvement in politics, may have taken away, um, it may have diminished his ability to focus on his business empire, uh, which of course happened to a lot of early founding fathers. Many of them, for instance, many of our presidents went in very wealthy people, and they came out insolvent, pretty much insolvent. Like George Washington. George Washington was another very wealthy man. John Hancock was wealthy. He didn't lose his fortune. Um, John Hancock was one of the presidents of the Continental Congress, right? Of course, um, the president of the Continental Congress was really a figurehead. Didn't have the sort of robust power that the president, the Article 2 president from the U.S. Constitution of 1787 had. Um, of course, I've mentioned how Thomas Jefferson also, he'd inherited a fortune. By the time he completed his presidency, he'd pretty much almost become bankrupt. That he had to sell his immense library to the U.S. Library of Congress, which became the foundation of the U.S. Library of Congress after the Library of Congress had actually been burned down in the War of 1812 with the British, right, which is often called a Second Revolutionary War. Uh, so James Madison also became almost bankrupt, of course, and he had inherited a fortune as well. Similarly, James Monroe, right, died in obscurity. He died on Independence Day, right, 5 years after John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on Independence Day as well, the 50th anniversary of America. They both died on the 4th of July, 1826. So remember, 4th of July will also be celebrating, basically commemorating the deaths of Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and James Monroe. They all died 4th of July. So, apart from the tragic life of Robert Morris, well, it was an exemplary life. It's unfortunate that he lost his fortune. You know, he lost his status as being the richest man in the world, the richest man in America, not the richest man in the world. I don't know if Clive of India had come up by then. Maybe Clive of India was had the richest personal fortune. If it wasn't the Tsar of Russia, right? But in terms of personal fortune, I don't know if Clive of India was alive by that time. I can't remember. Anyway. Now back to Charles Carroll. Charles Carroll, 1776, became the richest man in America with a personal fortune of 2.1 million pounds in 1776. That's roughly $616 million in 2026 money, right? $616 million in today's money. Charles Carroll's fortune, unlike Robert Morris, however, was in real estate, right? So he inherited a lot of land. He inherited a lot of land in Maryland, the Carrollton Manor in Maryland. So it's interesting that Charles Carroll, his name, if you're around Maryland, you live around Maryland, or you're familiar with Maryland, you notice his name is, you know, is like the banner for a lot of roads and streets and counties. There's Carroll County in Maryland, of course, that's named after Charles Carroll. And you know, we know of New Carrollton, right? That's after the Carroll family. So he inherited a lot of land, right? About 10,000 acres of land, the Carrollton Manor, and then he also inherited about 300 slaves. So his money was in unencumbered land and in slaves. And so, unlike Robert Morris, once the Revolutionary War broke out and the British blockaded, you know, the maritime trade of the United States, and which disrupted the business, the importing and exporting business of Robert Morris, which constituted his business empire. In the case of Charles Carroll, there was no disruption to his agricultural business, right? So he had land. Of course, we were able to keep the Brits out of the, you know, continental America, and so he was able to preserve his fortune, which was again mainly in slaves and lots of land, right? He had the most land in Maryland. Interestingly, though, both men were born out of wedlock. Charles Carroll was born out of wedlock. So was Robert Morris. Both men were born out of wedlock, which is interesting. Robert Morris, of course, was an immigrant. Another great immigrant born out of wedlock, of course, Alexander Hamilton, right? So it's kind of interesting how driven these men, these founding fathers born out of wedlock were. Another interesting thing about Charles Carroll is that Charles Carroll was the last of the living founding fathers. He lived the longest. He actually died at the age of 95 years old in 1832. So he lived a very long life, you know. I'm going to stop this video here. maybe I'll do other videos just talking about their individual biographies, because they're two interesting people, particularly Robert Morris. Well, he didn't exactly come from rags. Although he was a self-made man, he did inherit some money from his father. His father was a merchant, and he was in the tobacco business. And when his father died, he inherited some wealth, little wealth, not substantial, but he built the shipping empire himself, right? He built the shipping empire himself, the importing and exporting shipping empire, and of course he became the richest man in America. Unfortunately, he would lose his fortune through the land speculation and the bubble that burst in the late 1790s. My name is Olurotimi Osha, and I will keep you posted. Thank you.